President Bola Ahmed Tinubu on Friday presented the 2026 appropriation bill, christened Budget of Consolidation, Renewed Resilience and Shared Prosperity. Tinubu, while presenting the bill before the National Assembly, cited a 3.98% gross domestic product growth rate as proof of economic stabilization. However, the People's Democratic Party has accused President Bola Tinubu's administration of deepening economic hardship and fiscal disorder in Nigeria. Joining us on the show to review the 2026 budget, if the projections can be met, and the past budget performance is Professor Akpan, Ekpo, Professor of Economics and Public Policy at the University of Uyo. He will also discuss if the harmonization of 3 floating budgets is achievable. Good morning, Professor Akpan, Ekpo, and thank you for joining us on the morning show.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Well, Prof, let's look at the benchmarks.
Yeah.
The exchange rate, crude oil production, projected GDP growth, whether this will lead to consolidation and resilience that the president was talking about in his title of that budget. Oil production, 1.86 million barrels per day, is that achievable? 1,400 naira to the dollar in terms of exchange rate, whether that is certain, and all of that. 68 or is it 65 crude oil price expectation, all of that. Now, beyond that is that we operate 3 budgets simultaneously. We're going to carry we have carried 2024 into 2025. We are going to carry into 2026. Why can't we have a single window? What do you think is responsible for that, and what is the remedy?
Thank you very much. First, let me say that, we hope that the budget is cast in real numbers, because we've not been told whether these figures are nominal or they are real. That's the first thing to look at. The other issues, as you said, depends on the benchmarks. First of all, the issue of stability worries me, because when you say an economy is stable, you have to look at the entire parameters. Don't just base it on some macro data, which we're not even sure how reliable. The exchange rate of 14, I think it's 14.400 exchange rate to the dollar. In my view, is still quite high, because you have to ask, yes, it's relatively stable, but at what level, and in his interest. Then the whole issue of the oil benchmark, I think it's the $4 per barrel, and the production figures. The oil sector is a sector that you can actually base your budget on if we are realistic. But for now, that seems to be the major source of revenue when I last checked. But it's still very, very volatile. The issue of the growth rate of almost 4%, well, slightly above the population growth rate. Some minor, or let me say minimal progress when compared to the same period last year. But it's not something to celebrate, because an economy has to grow at least 2 digits, at least double digits, and sustain for a long period for you to say that you are going to have a dent on poverty. So the parameters are debatable, but that is how you get into how you drop a budget, because this budget is anchored on as you know, on the medium-term expenditure framework, and my budget speech, details. It is 2024. The capital, that's what only 7% of the, as of now, and 20% I don't know how we are going to consolidate when we have this sluggish, very sluggish of capital component, because it's the capital component that grows it, not the recurrent component, and there's a sluggish. So the only perhaps a good thing is that the president says that by March next year they will harmonize the three budgets. Let's see how that will happen. But if it is done, it will be useful, because it's good to have a single window. Because with that, you will now rejig the issue of confidence in the economy by both domestic and foreign investors. Running 2-3 budgets in 1 year doesn't make any sense in an economy in which we have the experts. So the problem has been the issue of implementation of all our budgets. We take it, we don't take it serious, and yet budgeting is very, very important when you look at the macro economy. The way of doing this is to take the issue of implementation seriously and release the capital component as at when due. If you look at the recurrent aspect of the budget, there's not much problem, because those ones are used in paying salaries and so on and so forth. My other worry is that there's also heavy dependence on oil. The oil price, I'm sure, the oil price is the oil price and the oil production figures what will determine the revenue base, the revenue projection for this budget. And also, as you know, the budget is just a 1-year plan. That's into law, is an estimate. So the issue of implementation is very, very crucial. Then the issue of, I wonder, I get disturbed when an economy experts talk about stability in terms of external reserves. That you have reserves that you cover 10 months of imports is a sign that an economy is stable. It is not, because the reserves is also dependent on your oil exports, and the oil exports, the revenue from oil is volatile. You don't control the price, you don't control the output. It depends on global dynamics. And the way the world is going now, we don't know what will happen to the oil prices going forward. So it's about time we emphasize our domestic revenue sources. So the other issue that is worrisome is the issue of debt service. I think about 26% of the budget is using debt servicing. That's quite high, you know. And then two crucial issues that are not even addressed in the budget, although one has been addressed partially, the issue of security. The president laid emphasis on security, and for this year's budget, a huge amount of about, in terms of value, the amount seems large. In terms of percentage, only 9.29% of the budget is allocated to defense and security. Security is very, very crucial. Then we will not see any specifics in terms of how to address the issue of power supply. No country grows using generators. We are still running a generator-driven economy. So we are hoping that within this plan period of 1 year, there should be substantial improvement in power supply. Because if power increased by 1%, then your GDP can even grow by 3.5%. But power is still very epileptic, you know, and we've not seen I know they talk generally about energy, but the issue is power supply. You cannot grow an economy if you have an epileptic power supply. And the president also mentioned the issue of security. That's very important. Without security, without relative peace, you cannot attract even domestic, not talk about foreign. So overall, we put in place budgets. We very very impressive title, but at the end, implement even budget. As you see, we don't even know how to assess performance, because we're talking here about 24, 25, and now we are trying to forecast for 2026. So those are my initial comment. But the good thing again here is that I think either for the first time, the capital budget is quite high.
Yes.
It's 44%. So if they can stick to that and implement that, it will help the economy. So that's, in my view, one of the good things. And then also,
all right, Professor Ekpo.
Rollover, and that is debatable. Where some has more than 1 year. You don't have a development plan. This budget is anchored on the medium-term expenditure framework, which, of course, if you have time, it can be shown that MTEP was brought in place when we abandoned planning. So I can understand that our plans have not been passed into law, so we are dependent too much on MTEP. If you have a development plan, MTEP will be phased out, and so the capital component of that plan will give you a yearly budget, at least the capital side of the budget. Right now, in my view, there's still some confusion of putting in place a budget. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Great. Just explained in your opening statement some of the key areas of the budget. But I want to ask you, you talked about capital expenditure being one of the positives of this of the budget of 2026. It is at 26.08 trillion naira, up from 23.44 trillion naira of last year. However, the conversation is around implementation and performance. As at the 2025 budget, as at Q3 of this year, only 17% of the budgeted amount had been released. So is it realistic to increase the amount when even for this current cycle, they've not been able to even meet half of the budget performance for capital expenditure? So is this something to celebrate now, or maybe something that can be done to ensure that what the performance or the actual spending is almost close to or commensurate to the amount budgeted for?
Thank you very much. I think you asked the right question. Well, in a budget, an economy like ours, you have to think big, but you raise the issue of implementation. It doesn't make sense if 2025 you've already released 17.7%, and now you're projecting 44%, I think it's 44% of capital budget for next year. Is quite ambitious. I don't see how they are going to do it, but at least if we get quarterly report of the budget by the first quarter of next year, we'll see how far that has been done. That is assuming that the 2025 capital component will be fully released by January or February. So it is a tall order. I definitely agree. But I'm saying in terms of the reasoning, it is in the right direction in saying that let's increase the capital component of the budget, because that is what grows the economy. How realistic, it depends. The issue again will be implementation. So let us find out from the relevant ministries what has been what are the constraints that we cannot achieve close to our target when it comes to capital component of the budget. And the other issues that the president has stressed is infrastructure, education, health. If you look at those components in terms of the total budget, they're very minimal for an economy that is struggling. They will spend 4.2% on the health sector, 6% on the education, quite below the 26% benchmark of the UN, and so on and so forth. So, and in all these components, there is capital that's recurrent. We don't know which one is which. That's why I said earlier that the devil is in the details. So what should happen is that the Ministry of Planning and Budget, Ministry of Finance, and the Labor Ministry should find out what are the constraints. Why are we not implementing our capital component of the budget? So even if it's 30%, why are we not doing that? And that is partly what is slowing down the economy. But again, we should be honest and say that the issue is a problem in the economy. The power issue, as I said earlier, is a problem. And even the exchange rate, which they are using, 1400, it is not, in my view, it is still quite high. So these are the problems, and I hope that going forward, the relevant ministries will find out what are the constraints. Why is it that on paper, in a yearly budget, we normally have high percentage of capital expenditure. But towards the end of the year, less than 30% has been released, as we saw in last year's budget. Yes.
Okay, Prof. And that's the sad reality, because we don't have a lot of transparency as regards figure. We are not getting figures as quickly as we should get them. And that's why when the president said, oh, we've met most of our revenue projection, and the minister said we have a shortfall of 30 trillion, we don't know how to reconcile that. And in fact, only about 17.7%, equivalent to 3.1 trillion, was released as at the third quarter for capital expenditure. So how are we sure that this 44% of capital expenditure, we're going to get to it? But despite that release, there was some prioritization of some projects over some, e.g., the coastal road that we said we expended over $1 billion for, or close to $1 billion for 7.7 kilometers, when people are still spending hours at the Benin bypass. In fact, somebody sent me a message that his daughter traveled from Lagos to Asaba, spent over 22 hours on the road, and that the Benin bypass is in bad shape. So how do we prioritize all of these areas with this budget? And that's why a lot of people look and say, is it even going to be realistic, even with when we say the taxes are coming in this year? Where's the transparency?
Well, it's not. There's not much transparency, and shaded in terms of the numbers, but there's not transparency. Even accountability is an. We're saying that the president has given a speech. There now be debates as to the components, the details, and this is where we have to make sure that the process is transparent. What is going on? For example, the data that we get, how reliable is the data? We're not sure. How reliable? For example, government bonds, that inflation rate has been coming down, but realistic, it doesn't reflect the reality in the marketplace. But we know why. The rebasing factor, where items were increased from 700 to 900, and relatives given to energy, given to food, and so on and so forth. So there's a problem, and that is where the serious interrogation, serious debate starts to make sure that either the budget or the House has a right, as you know, to tamper with these numbers and make it much more. How they will do that, how far they can do that, we will see. As I said earlier, any budget, even if it's passed into law, it is still an estimate. And it's for Nigerians, especially the relevant stakeholders, to interrogate this and make sure that it makes sense. A budget speech, in my view, is just a speech. We need to interrogate it, and the House has a right to make it more, if they are serious. That's the way I look at that. I look at it rather.
Okay, Prof, just before we go, the president in his budget speech was talking about priorities and allocations. Security, people, national productivity, he said. And then he listed his priorities: security, infrastructure, education, health. What do you think of those priorities and the allocations in the order in which he outlined them?
Well, is it normally those areas, any serious government will be areas of focus. If you look at the percentages, the amount allocated, it will not do much, except for security, which is 9.29% of the total budget. If you look at infrastructure, 6.1%, that is quite low. You look at education, 6% education, and even health. The health system in the country has not improved in the last 15, 20 years, 4.2%. And each of these components has its own capital and recurrent. So, for example, the ratios I've quoted, which percentage of that goes to capital in health, goes to recurrent, which percentage goes to total in education. The only hope we have is that in these priority areas, for example, some national governments will also lay emphasis on these areas. So overall, in the entire federation, perhaps there will be some light at the end. But in terms of listing priorities, all I see here is that defense has a remarkable increase. All the others are below global benchmarks. And I say we need to be specific how we are going to solve the power problem. We are running a generator-driven economy, and no country will grow with that. And so when the debate starts, let them tell us how we are going to increase power supply so that the economy can grow, we can encourage medium and small scale industries, and so on and so forth. Listen, priorities, and base it on allocation that are not even reasonable, in my view. For example, the issue of education. Global best practice for you to have at least 20% of your budget on education. Here we're having 6.05%, you know. It's like a routine, you know. You have to have a budget and you don't care how it is being implemented. So we are hoping that going forward, as the president says, they will take the issue serious, but time will tell.
All right, well, thank you so much for your time with us, Professor Ekpo. We look forward to taking this conversation further, of course, dissecting the elements, and like you said, the devil is in the detail of the budget 2026.